back to Spotlight, where we feature the University of Central Arkansas's College of Fine Arts and Communication. I'm Donna Lampkin-Stevens. We have a special show today from the Baum Gallery. My friend Deb Custer, who is professor of art, is here with me to talk about the new exhibit at the Baum, Finding Shelter, an exhibition of contemporary fiber art. So Deb, welcome.
Thank you.
So I understand this is your very first time to curate a show.
It is.
Talk about how that came about.
I was invited. I've taught a fibers class since spring of '08, and just the response of students to the fiber medium is just really exciting. And you know, we show slides, but it's one of those medias that, unless you see it, you just can't believe all the craftsmanship and the detail and the different materials. So when I was approached to curate one by the exhibits committee, there's an exhibition committee that works with the Baum, with Barclay McConnell, our director, and so they just invited me to do that.
So let's back up.
Okay.
People, I think, many people don't think of fiber art as art. They think of it as craftsmanship, like you said. So what is fiber art?
I would say, well, there's kind of two different directions. There's artists that create work using, that you would think of as traditional basketry and stitching and just some of the techniques that were used for functions. And you know, so that's what you kind of think of when you think of the word fiber. But now, in our society with the contemporary, you know, we don't have to make all of these things for function, and yet the techniques and the materials are still interesting to artists. So they will use those and use them in ways that are more expressive.
So it's kind of moved from the from functionality, I guess, to art.
Yes.
Okay, I like that.
Yes, and then so they'll use some of the traditional techniques, but also fiber artists will take traditional fiber materials, such as we have canvas and thread, but you're not sewing a garment. You're using it as a drawing instrument, and so it'll also be traditional materials that are used in a contemporary way.
So how did you get involved in making fiber art? I know we've talked on Spotlight before about your quilting, and so how did you get involved in that?
So I guess mine would be the same way. I started out as a weaver and was making things more functional, and then you just begin to want to make it more just for the making and express more ideas than to have a purpose, more to be expressive of an idea. And so I fit into the same realm. And these are artists that I have just seen their work too, and not met them, and just loved the form and, you know, just compelling objects that they would make.
Well, you're the perfect person to curate the show. So tell me, they asked you to do the show, and so what did you go through? You said you didn't know the artists, so how did you come to these 13 artists?
Well, like I said, I've been teaching since '08, teaching fibers, and so I would bring up artists, obviously, contemporary artists, and so some of these are familiar that I would be showing to my students, that I have showed my students. Then I would just look through magazines. That 500 Baskets is one of my favorite collection of work, and so just started finding ones that spoke to me in some way, and then kind of saw a theme that I evidently like, and so that's where I came up with the idea of shelter.
From finding the artist, you found the theme.
I think so.
Okay.
I think from there, looking more at their work was more how the themes started. You know, you start listing the ones that and then you go back and look at them all again and think, now looking for the ones that tend to go in this direction. Okay. And then I begin to invite them.
And so the theme was finding shelter.
Yes.
So how did you come upon that?
So the shelter, where I was finding things that looked like housing, or looked like they would provide protection, or there was some interesting way that this might be a security thing, or some way something precious is inside of it. So it all just, so then you just kind of think of an idea for a title in that one.
And I think the time of year is even perfect for it, because we're all kind of cocooning, aren't we?
I like that.
So,
I like that.
Okay, so tell us about the artists in the show. I think I read that. How many do you try to invite? I mean, how does that work?
I thought I would be doing well to get 6. I think I sent out about 15, 16 maybe invitations, and I have 13 in here. So and some didn't even respond. I think almost everybody that even responded were able to bring a work to me. So they are at varying. Some are newer work than others from these artists. I'm wanting to fit into the theme, but I really think you're seeing a sampling of how these artists work, how I knew them, how I knew of their work.
And so you invite the artists and then they choose the pieces that they
in
want
relation to the theme. I said basically, yes.
Here's the theme.
Here's the theme, and here's what I've seen of your work.
Okay.
And what could you offer us?
Okay, Deb. Well, we will meet with Ann and Joe when we come back. So Spotlight will return again in a moment.
Thank you.
If you want to be a parent, it doesn't matter how you play or even what you wear. You just need to be there. Thousands of teens in foster care don't need perfection. They just need you.
I'm back now with fiber sculptor Ann Coddington from Champaign, Illinois. So Ann, welcome to the Baum Gallery and to the UCA. Give us a little bit of your background first.
So I got my undergraduate degree in fibers from Colorado State University in the mid-'80s, and then worked for a while as a textile designer in Los Angeles, and then went back to get my master's degree in the 90s, studying at the University of Illinois in the sculpture department.
And working, I mean, your undergraduate degree in fibers, so you knew fibers have spoken to you for a long time.
That's right.
Why?
Yes.
What is it about the medium?
Well, one thing that I really am drawn to is the familiarity of the textile surface. So we all are familiar with fibers. When you approach a sculpture made of fibers, the viewer has an innate kind of sensibility of what that material is, because we wear clothing, we sit on upholstered fabrics, and we walk on rugs, and so whether or not you're conscious of it, you have a innate familiarity with that material that I think is a opening for the viewer to investigate the work.
So were you an artistic young girl?
I never really thought of myself that way, but I think looking back on it, I was. I would go out in my backyard and pick up sticks and then take pieces of fabric and tie it all together and make little sculptural things. And I just remember always creating something, making things was a real part of my childhood. And then I went to college to study interior design, and one of the classes, because I thought, well, that's a way I can get a job in art. But then I took a fibers class, which was a required course, and fell in love with it. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and be an artist. I don't know what I was thinking, honestly, but
that's how we wind up. So your job in LA, what did that entail? Was that more of an artist job or
well, yeah. What it was, I was a textile designer for a garment manufacturer, and we made clothing for women's. Children's and women's clothing, and I drew the patterns and designs that would be printed on the fabric.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah, it was really great. However, I was drawing for 40, 50 hours a week, which didn't leave any time for me to kind of investigate my own work and my own ideas outside of that work. And so I decided that I needed to go get a MFA and focus a little bit more on my own work.
So you left your work and you just jumped off into being a non-traditional student, and good for you.
Yeah, I started taking classes at Cal State Long Beach and under Carol Shaw Sutton and Lisa Hart, and I just decided I'm going to have to quit my job and just be an artist. Yeah. In fact, in this exhibition, my fibers professor, Tom Lundberg, is represented in this exhibition.
Oh, how fun.
So it's an honor for me to be included in a show that one of my mentors
Did you know that when Deb asked you to?
I didn't know the whole list of artists that were going to be included, but I was really happy to see his work here. And he was just a really influential professor for me.
Good.
Going through college.
Now, I read that twining and netting are your sort of preferred media, I guess. So how did you get started with those?
Well, when I was at Cal State Long Beach, I worked with, like I said, Carol Shaw Sutton, and she had this beautiful object in her office. If you've never been into a fiber professor's office, it's a cornucopia of wonderful things. And so she had this object sitting on a shelf in her office, and I said, "How is that made?" And she said, "Oh, that's called twining." And she said, and she threw this little piece at me that was about 6 inches long, and she said, "Here, you can figure this out." And it was on a Friday. And so I spent the whole weekend making this little tiny thing, and I figured it out because it's really a pretty simple process. And yeah, so that was in the late 80s, and I've not stopped twining. I can't believe it, but yeah, I've not stopped twining since then. What I like about twining is that it is very sculptural. So you can make a three-dimensional form. It's a basket making process. So like most baskets, they have a sort of a sculptural form, like if you push a side of a basket in, it wants to pop back out. And this is a similar sort of construction, so that it's very sculptural. It doesn't have to have something inside to create the form. So like this particular piece is hollow and very hard, so it has the integrity of sculpture, which attracts me to it. And then with regard to netting, the thing I like about the netting is how sort of ephemeral and transparent it is in contrast to the sort of solid mass-like object of the twining. This speaks of a volume, but it's open and more delicate in a way. It's about sort of a tenuous relationship between the two objects. So we have the foot, which represents sort of movement, like walking away, like leaving something behind, change. And then the object on the ground, which is made of woven copper, it's a random woven copper piece, and it's supposed to represent sort of a weight, but be at the same time sort of beautiful and attractive and sparkly. So it has, and I wanted it to be somewhat nest-like, even though it's not really the form of a nest. It has that sort of structure of a nest. And the thread that connects them is something very sort of tenuous and thin. And so it's speaking about this relationship between something sort of weighting it down or pulling away, or like for me, I get the feeling like if I started walking, this thread might just break. And so it's things that we're connected to, that we're letting go of or hanging on to, or
Love it. Now you have another piece here called Fingerprints, and we're going to have some footage of that.
Okay.
Tell us about the inspiration for Fingerprints.
So short time ago, I turned 50, and all my life I've been kind of thinking about, like I remember when I was like 8 years old, I thought, okay, this is about 1/10 of my life that I've lived. And I'd kind of calculate my life in sort of fractional numeric terms. And then when I hit 50, it was like, wow, that's like a half of a century. And it seemed so significant. And yet and then I thought, well, I guess I could still call it a half a life left, maybe. And here's hoping.
Yeah.
And so it was made sort of to commemorate that. And so I made 50 forms, and they're all sort of play with fibers. So there's ones that are stitched, and a number of basket making processes, and even knit. I had my mother knit one of them, and I've made almost all of them, but then every now and then I'll have her knit something for me.
And I think how appropriate for to commemorate your 50th birthday.
Yes,
so,
right. She was there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was sort of, I wanted each one of them to be different, but then united by this sort of finger-like shape. And like our fingerprints, each one is different, to think about the years of my life as being sort of in some ways the same and in some ways different. So
and tied together beautifully. So
thank you.
Well, Anne, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I love your work, and I'm glad you're part of this show.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say what a pleasure it is to be included in this exhibition, and I really appreciate Deb, inviting me to have my work here.
Excellent.
Thank you.
We'll be back again in a moment.
the great outside.
My new mom and I have a lot in common.
So shiny.
We both love the outdoors.
That's not a flower.
And she knows a lot about wildlife.
A labradoodle.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of kids in foster care will take you just as you are.
I'm back now with Joe Staley, who has 5 pieces in the show. And Joe, welcome to Conway and the UCA and the Baum Gallery.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now tell us a little bit about your background. I know that you're the chair of the department at the University of Missouri.
That's correct, which is a new position for me. Up until this last fall, I was head of the fiber program for the last 30 plus years.
Okay.
And so this is a huge transition for me.
I bet. I bet. Administrative work.
Yes.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of St. Louis, Missouri on a farm, and I was very fortunate that on weekends my parents would take us into St. Louis to visit family, and we would take advantage of cultural events and go to museums and concerts, but during the week I was free to run on a 300-acre farm and enjoy all of the exciting events and moments that go on in the country.
And what a great place to discover fiber.
Exactly.
So talk about how your, I guess maybe how your childhood influenced maybe what you wound up going on to do.
And it's always interesting because you don't realize how your childhood is influencing you until you're an adult and you can look back. But I know for certain that those experiences, taking walks in nature and constantly picking up objects that spoke to me and bringing them home and keeping them on shelves and looking at them on a regular basis was very influential. But I also come from a line of women who have been seamstresses and handcrafted knitters and crocheters. My grandmother, my aunt, my mother on my mother's side, and then on my father's side I also have women who were very inventive needle crafters in the 50s and 60s, and I know that those have all been influences in my life as well.
Now, did you pick up the needle? Were you? I mean, my grandmother was fabulous, and I'm terrible.
My mother taught me to sew from the time that I was quite young. I made my own doll clothes from the time I was about 5 years old, and she was a right-handed knitter, and I'm a left-handed person, and so she took me to a friend of hers in our community so that I could learn to knit left-handed, which I never could figure out. I'd just do it right-handed. But so there was always this love and respect for textiles and textile processes, and so I grew up doing all of those things.
At the time, though, did you even consider it to be art? Or was it sort of like Anne talked about, sort of function?
I think primarily it was seen as a functional thing, but my mother was a tailor, and there is an art to being a tailor. And my aunt worked for Brown Shoe Company in St. Louis in their advertising department, and was always doing very inventive things, and her creativity also took the form of her needlework, where she designed her own needlework. It was shown in department stores in St. Louis at Macy's and Stixbury and Fuller's, which that is an art form.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that we thought of it as an art form at that point in time, but in the early 60s is when fibers went through this huge explosion. And it's being utilized in large-scale architectural work. It was being explored for sculpture. It was being utilized by people who had not grown up doing textile processes but had gone back to the land to earn their living and wanted to have some kind of a supplementary income. And so there was this whole burgeoning of a lot of craft areas, and fiber really exploded during that time period. It's also the time period when we have the beginning of the contemporary basketry movement, of which I have been part of for 30-some years now.
Wow. And you are curating a show. Talk about that.
Okay, I'm currently curating in collaboration with the National Basketry Organization and the University of Missouri a 3-year traveling show called Rooted, Revived, Reinvented Basketry in America, which is going to tell the story of how basketry has evolved and gone from this lowly functional craft to being preserved and celebrated as a traditional functional craft, but also how it entered into the contemporary art world and has become really integrated into the dialogue of contemporary art today.
Excellent, excellent. Maybe it'll come through here.
Well, we'll see.
So you have a wide range of work, Jo. You sculpture objects, artist books, installations, mixed media. What's your favorite?
Well, it depends on the moment.
I know exactly what you mean. Yes, yes. Good.
You know, I've been doing this long enough now. Anne talked about the first 50 years of her life. Well, I'm a little older than that. And what I have discovered is that over the years, I will do a body of work and think, okay, I've explored this, I'm done with it, I'm ready to move on to something else. And I do move on. But then time goes by and I recognize that, oh, I have more to say. But I'm bringing in new information, maybe new techniques and processes, so that it's adding to the conversation that I'm having with that work, and in a way that I wasn't able to do in an earlier part of my life.
Sure, sure.
And also, sometimes there's ideas that you have that are in your head, but you can't figure out how to make them material. You may not have the technical ability to do it, or you may not have an understanding of how you can translate that idea into a physical object. And so sometimes you have to incubate for a while.
I like that. I like that. Now tell us about these pieces. They fit perfectly in with shelter, finding shelter.
Yes.
So talk about some of these.
Well, the majority of my work is inspired by nature. It's also very much inspired by the mundane daily activities of my life. It might be personal conversations that I'm having with my spouse or my children. It might be looking at that salad bowl that's handmade that I have sitting on my counter and realizing how much I love that form and the surfaces in it. Or it might be inspiration from reading an incredible book like Isabel Allende's House of Spirits. So my inspiration comes from a lot of different sources, but it always comes back to nature in one form or another. And this particular series I think of as being interactive. These are not traditional book forms, but they are narrative. And you can't turn the pages, but you can take the objects out of their reliquary. And what you discover then is that there are two sides to this particular piece, and that if you look inside, you can see a little something else. And then if you look to the back of the object, there is something else there. And I want you as a viewer to be seduced into wanting to touch and hold and interact with the work, because I think of it like a new friend. You get to know somebody and you recognize, well, this is a person that I'd like to know better. So you get together again, and as you get to know each other better and better, there is a deeper relationship, there's a more intimate relationship, and I like viewers to have that kind of a relationship with my work.
I think sometimes people are afraid to touch when they come in.
Well, and we're told in galleries and museums, do not touch.
So I love this. I love it.
Thank you.
So
this is all made with handmade paper. And I am working with plant materials that are processed and literally beaten to a pulp. But they're not just beaten to a pulp, they're beaten for 10 to 12 hours. And that produces a type of paper that is very strong, skin-like, and translucent. And so this becomes like a skin in the same way that the human body is a skin.
Love it, love it. Okay, well, Jo, there's lots of great stuff here that we hope the public can come out and see. Finding Shelter is going to be on display through February the 18th at the Baum Gallery of Fine Art at the University of Central Arkansas. Free admission. Hours are 10 to 5 Monday through Friday and 10 to 7 on Thursdays. So come out and take a look. It's really good. It's really good material.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Spotlight will return next time.